tiny third-floor apartment was the kind of place where dreams came to die silently. Delilah leaned her hands against the kitchen sink and stared at her fragmented reflection in the cracked mirror. 32 years old, and each one felt like a ton weighing down on her narrow shoulders. Tears streamed down her face as the soup simmered slowly on the stove, filling the space with an aroma that would have been comforting in other times. Her phone vibrated on the table, displaying the name of the hospital she already knew by heart. Delilah answered with trembling fingers, her voice choked by restrained sobs. "I can't afford this treatment. Isn't there another option? Please, there must be something. Anything I can do for my daughter." On the kitchen table next to the bowl awaiting the soup was a small red-labeled bottle, rat poison. Delilah had bought it 3 days earlier, hidden in the depths of her bag like a shameful secret, a silent confession of what she was about to do. The open photo album beside it showed Ivy at different stages of her short life, the last page revealing the 5-year-old girl in a hospital bed, tubes and machines connected to her frail body, weakened by illness. Delilah slid her fingers over the photograph as if she could somehow reach her daughter through the paper. "I didn't want it to end like this, my love. The doctors said it would only be a matter of time, that the pain would only get worse until your little body couldn't take it anymore." The pot boiled over, snapping Delilah out of her dark thoughts. She rushed to turn off the heat, transferring the soup into the waiting bowl. Her hands were shaking so badly it seemed impossible to hold the ladle steady. The poison bottle felt like a ton as she picked it up, unscrewing the cap with numb fingers. Delilah hesitated for a moment, her conscience waging a fierce battle against the despair consuming her. The doctor's voice echoed in her mind, speaking of progressive pain, of how the disease would advance, of how there was no accessible treatment for someone in her financial condition. She closed her eyes and poured the contents of the vial into the hot soup. "May God forgive me for this, but I cannot let her suffer. It's the last act of love I can offer my daughter." With an abrupt and clumsy motion, Delilah spilled some of the poison onto the table. The colorless liquid quickly spread, forming a puddle that threatened to drip onto the floor. Panic took hold of her. If Ivy saw, if she suspected. Delilah grabbed the dish towel and began frantically cleaning, scrubbing the wood with such force that her fingers turned red and sore. Her heart was beating so hard it seemed intent on escaping her chest, her breathing short and shallow as she checked that no evidence remained. Her mind screamed in protest against what she was about to do. Perhaps there is another way. Perhaps I can sell the apartment, perhaps I can take out more loans, but what for? To prolong her suffering for a few more months? A fit of painful coughing came from Ivy's room, the sound of a small body struggling against the inevitable. It was the kind of cough that tore not only at the girl's frail lungs, but also at Delilah's already shattered heart. That sound was a cruel reminder of the reality they faced, dispelling any hesitation that might still exist. Delilah took a deep breath, stirred the soup thoroughly to ensure the poison dissolved completely, erasing any visible trace of what she had done. She looked at the fatal meal, feeling the weight of her decision compressing her chest like a stone. "My little one does not deserve to suffer until the end. It's better this way, it has to be better this way." A peaceful sleep, without pain, without tubes, without more hospitalizations. The door to the room opened, and Ivy appeared at the kitchen entrance, her thin little body sustained by a force of will that always surprised Delilah. Despite her cadaverous pallor, slightly blue lips and deep dark circles marking her childish face, Ivy was smiling. That innocent, trusting smile was like a stab in Delilah's heart. The girl dragged her feet to the table, carefully sitting on the chair her mother had pulled out. Her small, frail fingers grasped the spoon with difficulty as she looked at her mother with eyes that, despite the illness, still shone with love. "Mummy, are you crying again? Don't cry, okay? The doctor said I'm strong like a superhero, and superheroes always win in the end, don't they?" Delilah forced a smile as she placed the bowl of soup in front of her daughter, the steam rising in gentle spirals, carrying with it the promise of an end to the suffering. She sat across from Ivy, watching every movement, every spoonful the girl brought to her lips. Time seemed to have slowed down, each second stretching into an eternity of agony as Delilah watched her daughter eat in silence, eyes brimming and heart shattered by what she had decided to do. Her fingers clung to the edge of the table with such force that her knuckles whitened, her short nails digging into the wood as if trying to anchor themselves to something solid as her world crumbled. Delilah tried to memorize every detail of Ivy's face, the shape of her eyes, her little upturned nose, the dimple that appeared at the corner of her mouth when she smiled. "Is the soup good, my dear? I put those vegetables you like in it. You need to eat it all to get strong to... When Ivy finished the soup, Delilah felt a mixture of relief and absolute horror taking over her body. It was done. There was no going back. She picked up the empty bowl and placed it in the sink, her legs moving automatically, as if they belonged to someone else. Delilah helped Ivy up from the chair, gently guiding her back to the bedroom. The girl showed no immediate signs of the poison, no suspicion of what her mother had done. Delilah settled her daughter on the bed, tucking the covers around the small body, her movements mechanical, as if disconnected from her own reality. She sat on the edge of the bed and opened Ivy's favorite storybook, her trembling voice struggling to form the words between stifled sobs. "Which story do you want to hear tonight, my love? The one about the brave princess, or the dragon who was afraid of fire?" The pages of the children's book seemed blurred through the tears Delilah could no longer contain. She read mechanically, her voice breaking every few words as she watched Ivy's eyes grow heavy. The guilt and horror of what she had done threatened to suffocate her, but she kept reading, as if the story could somehow redeem her unforgivable act. When she realized Ivy had fallen asleep, Delilah carefully closed the book and leaned down to kiss her daughter's forehead, her lips lingering there for several seconds, absorbing the feel of the soft skin, the scent of the fine hair. She rose silently, her knees nearly buckling under the weight of her conscience. Delilah walked to the door, glancing one last time at the small form under the covers, etching that image into her memory. "Sleep well, my little one. May the angels carry you gently to a place without pain." Delilah closed Ivy's bedroom door and turned the key in the lock, the metallic click sounding like a final sentence. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly before her, the walls closing in as if to crush her. Her legs finally gave out and she slid down against the door to the floor, hugging her knees like a frightened child. The sobs she had held in for so long exploded from her chest, shaking her entire body with violent spasms of pain and remorse. The tears flowed freely now, soaking her shirt as she rocked back and forth, guilt consuming her like acid. Delilah rested her forehead against the cold wood of the door, as if she could somehow be closer to her daughter. "Forgive me, my love. It's better this way than watching you suffer until the end. One day when we meet again, I hope you'll understand I did this out of love, just out of love." Physical and emotional exhaustion finally overcame Delilah. Her body, still leaning against Ivy's bedroom door, gradually relaxed as sleep claimed her. It wasn't a peaceful sleep, but filled with fragmented nightmares, blurred-faced doctors pointing accusatory fingers, police officers dragging her away from Ivy, the small white casket lowering into the ground. Hours passed in this state of tormented semi-consciousness until something pierced through the fog of her nightmares. Delilah stirred, initially confused about what had awoken her. Then she heard it again, a sound coming from Ivy's room. It wasn't a moan of pain or the terrible silence she had expected, but the crystalline sound of childish laughter. Delilah held her breath, her body freezing in absolute terror. Even more disturbing was the second voice she heard, a woman's voice, adult and strangely familiar, responding to Ivy's joy. "It can't be real, it can't be real. What have I done? Oh God, what have I done?" The laughter continued from the other side of the door, clear as bells, impossible to exist after what Delilah had done. Her body trembled uncontrollably, cold sweat running down her back as she rose with difficulty, her wobbly legs barely supporting her weight. This couldn't be happening. The poison should have taken effect hours ago. There should be no laughter, no voices, let alone a familiar-sounding adult female voice answering her daughter. Delilah looked around frantically, searching for something to open the locked door. Her terror-widened eyes fixed on the small toolbox under the kitchen sink. "This isn't real, it can't be real. It's my mind punishing me for what I did. It has to be that. God, please, let it just be that." With trembling hands, Delilah rummaged through the toolbox until she found a flathead screwdriver. The The cold metal against her palm seemed to anchor her to reality somehow as she staggered back to the bedroom. The laughter from the other side of the door grew louder, more joyful. Ivy hadn't sounded so lively in months. Delilah inserted the tip of the screwdriver into the lock, forcing it with increasing desperation. The metal scratched at the lock mechanism, resisting her trembling efforts. Sweat dripped from her brow, blurring her vision. Finally, a metallic snap indicated the lock had given way. Delilah hesitated for a moment, her hand frozen on the doorknob, her heart threatening to burst from her chest. What if it's real? What if she's alive? Or worse, what if she's not? What if it's just me completely losing my mind after what I did? The door swung open with a shrill creak that seemed to cut the air like a razor. The scene before Delilah was so unexpected, so impossible, that her body reacted before her mind could process it. She took 2 stumbling steps backwards and fell seated in the hallway, feeling the blood drain from her face. Ivy was sitting up in bed, upright and alert, her formerly pallid face now flushed with life. But it wasn't that which made Delilah lose her balance. It was the translucent figure of a woman dressed in white, sitting at the edge of her daughter's bed. Even through the ethereal transparency, Delilah could distinguish every detail of the simple cotton dress, the long dark hair, and the delicate hands gesturing as the apparition animatedly conversed with Ivy. No, it can't be. I'm going insane. It's not possible. When Delilah entered the room, dragging herself across the floor, still in a state of shock, the figure slowly turned its head in her direction. It was like looking in a mirror. The same face shape, the same dark eyes, the same small upturned nose. It was her own face, but it wasn't her. It was a face Delilah hadn't seen in 15 years, except in old photographs and her own recurring nightmares. Before she could react, before she could even breathe, the figure smiled with an expression between sadness and relief, and then dissipated like morning mist in the sun, leaving behind only a faint scent of fresh water and wildflowers. Ivy, seemingly oblivious to what had just happened, turned to her mother with a face lit up by an animation she hadn't shown in months. "Mommy, the lady in white said it's not my time yet. She said you need to take me to the river tomorrow. She said it's very important." Delilah rose from the floor with difficulty, her shaky legs carrying her to Ivy's bed. Her entire body was trembling as she approached the spot where the figure had been sitting mere seconds before. With hesitant fingers, she reached out to touch the empty space. An intense, biting cold enveloped her fingers immediately, so penetrating it burned like liquid fire, tearing a muffled scream from her lips. Delilah pulled her hand back, rubbing the numb digits that now displayed a slight bluish tinge, as if they had been dipped in ice. Your brain struggled to process what was happening, to find some rational explanation, some anchor in the reality you knew. With mechanical, almost robotic movements, Delilah reached for Ivy's wrist, seeking to confirm that the girl was truly alive. The pulse beat strong and regular under her fingers, the skin warm and rosy, so different from the cadaveric pallor the child displayed just a few hours ago. "This is not possible. You ate the soup. I saw you eat it all. How can you be like this? Are you feeling well? Do you feel any pain?" Ivy shook her head negatively, her large dark eyes shining with a vitality that Delilah had not seen since the beginning of the illness. The girl not only looked better, she looked transformed, as if the disease that was slowly consuming her had receded, at least temporarily. Delilah touched her daughter's forehead. There was no fever. She observed her breathing, deep and regular, without the characteristic wheeze of the last few months. It was as if some kind of miracle had occurred, a miracle as impossible as the apparition she had just witnessed. With a voice trembling with emotion and confusion, Delilah asked who the girl in white was. Ivy smiled with childlike innocence, as if the answer were the most obvious thing in the world. "She said she knows you, and that you promised her something a long time ago. She was alone in the river for a very long time. She said she has been waiting for so long that the water almost washed away all her memory, but now she managed to come back, because I look like you." Ivy's words hit Delilah like a physical punch, robbing her of breath. The river, the promise. It couldn't be a coincidence. It was impossible for Ivy to know, for her to even imagine the meaning of those words. Delilah instinctively recoiled, stumbling into the chair beside the bed, knocking it over with a crash that seemed deafening in the silence that followed. Her back slammed against the dresser, causing the lampshade to violently sway. A wave of nausea washed over her as the pieces started to fall into place in her mind, forming a picture she had spent 15 years trying to forget. Without another word, Delilah left the room, closing the door behind her. Her legs moved of their own accord, carrying her down the hallway toward her own bedroom. It can't be her, it can't be Marigold. She's been dead for 15 years. It's just my guilt haunting me. Yes, that's it. It's the guilt over what I did to Ivy, mixed with my memories of Marigold. Delilah's room was dimly lit, illuminated only by the faint light filtering through the cracks in the curtain. She went straight to the closet, pushing aside clothes and shoeboxes until she reached the back, where a small wooden box had remained hidden for years. Her hands were shaking so badly that she nearly dropped the box as she pulled it out. It was a memory box she didn't have the courage to look at, but also didn't have the courage to get rid of. With trembling fingers, Delilah lifted the lid, revealing a small treasure trove of carefully preserved memories: faded hair ribbons, yellowed movie stubs, tiny seashells collected on childhood outings. Beneath it all, protected by a wax paper envelope, was the photograph she dreaded finding. Delilah retrieved it carefully, as if handling a bomb about to explode. The image showed two identical teenage girls, about 16 years old, both smiling by the edge of a river. The long dark hair, the same eyes, the same dimples, perfect mirrors of each other. With shaking hands, she turned the photograph over. On the back, written in that achingly familiar rounded childish handwriting, were the words that made her stomach drop. A promise is a promise, together forever, even after death. Marigold. Tears blurred Delilah's vision as memories flooded her mind. The river where she and Marigold had grown up together, the promise made under the old willow tree that they would never separate, the terrible day when Marigold had disappeared into the waters during an unexpected storm. Her body was only found 3 days later, trapped among rocks miles away. Delilah had never forgiven herself for surviving, for failing to hold her sister's hand when the current swept her away. For 15 years, she had carried this burden, burying it deeper and deeper, moving away from the river, the town, the memories. And now, in some impossible way, Marigold was back, asking Delilah to fulfill a promise made so many years ago. Why now, Marigold? Why after all this time? And why through my daughter? What do you want from me after all these years? A bolt of lightning suddenly illuminated the room, followed by the distant rumble of thunder. Delilah hadn't noticed a storm approaching, so absorbed was she in her whirlwind of memories and emotions. She walked to the window, pulling back the curtain to watch the rain now pouring down, turning the deserted street into a river of asphalt. That's when she saw it. Across the street, standing in the downpour without seeming to get wet, was the female figure in white. Even from a distance, Delilah could feel her gaze fixed in her direction, as if she could see through the walls, through her very soul. The figure raised a pale hand, a gesture that seemed simultaneously a wave and a beckoning. Delilah was paralyzed, unable to turn away from the window, unable to avert her eyes. Marigold, Bess, is that really you? How is this possible? What do you want from me? Please, what do you want? A particularly intense bolt of lightning split the sky, illuminating the entire street with its ghostly blue light. For a second, the figure's face became perfectly visible. It was Marigold, without a doubt. The same face Delilah saw in the mirror every day, but with an expression of sadness and longing she had never witnessed in life. The apparition's eyes seemed to pierce directly into Delilah's soul, stirring up memories and feelings she had tried to bury for so many years. When the lightning faded and darkness returned, the figure had disappeared. Delilah blinked, rubbing her eyes, wondering if she had imagined it all. That's when she noticed, on the outside of the window, perfectly visible against the rain-streaked glass, were small feminine handprints, as if someone had pressed their palms against the pane, trying to look inside, or trying to get in. The prints were made of water, but not from the falling rain. They were perfectly formed, static, as if frozen in time. Delilah recoiled, covering her mouth with her hands to stifle a scream of terror. My God, This is really happening. Marigold has come back. Has she come for my daughter or for me? Has she come to take revenge or to save us? What does she want at the river? Why do we have to go back there after all these years? The morning arrived with a brightness that seemed almost offensive after the night of terror Delilah had endured. She did not sleep, unable to close her eyes for more than a few seconds without seeing Marigold's face, without feeling the chill of those ghostly hands against the window pane. The marks had disappeared with the rising sun, as if they had never existed, but Delilah knew what she had seen. Even more disturbing was Ivy's state. The girl had awoken renewed, with a gleam in her eyes and a color in her cheeks she had not shown for months. The poison, which should have killed her, seemed to have been completely neutralized. It was as if Marigold, or whatever that apparition was, had purified the girl's body during the night. Now sitting behind the wheel of her old Chevrolet, Delilah watched in the rearview mirror as Ivy cheerfully hummed in the back seat, swinging her legs like any healthy child. How can I take her to the same river where I lost my sister? How can I trust a ghost even if it is Marigold's ghost? But how can I not go after what happened last night? What if this is the only chance to save my daughter? The car snaked along the winding road leading out of town, venturing into a more rural area where the asphalt gave way to a dirt road. Delilah gripped the steering wheel so tightly her fingers ached, each curve bringing her closer to the place she had sworn never to visit again. Thoughts jostled in her mind. The poison that did not work, Marigold's apparition, Ivy's sudden improvement, the promise of a cure by the river. It seemed like madness, an elaborate nightmare, but also the only hope she had left. Suddenly, the car radio, which was turned off, came on by itself. The static hiss gave way to a melody that made Delilah's blood run cold. It was "My Son is Scared," the lullaby her mother used to sing to her and Marigold when they were little. Delilah tried to turn off the radio, frantically twisting the knob, but the music continued soft and hypnotic, as if coming from somewhere beyond the device. This isn't happening. It's just a coincidence, it has to be. But that song, we haven't heard it since before the accident. I like that song, Mummy. The white auntie sang it to me last night, Ivy commented from the back seat, her innocent voice cutting through Delilah's growing panic. The radio turned off as abruptly as it had turned on, leaving a heavy silence inside the car. Delilah looked in the rearview mirror again. Ivy was smiling, completely oblivious to the terror her words were provoking. With every kilometer they approached the river, Ivy's behavior changed subtly. She seemed more alert, more animated, as if an invisible force was energizing her. When they finally reached the small abandoned road leading to the riverbank, Delilah had to stop the car, her nerves on edge. Taking several deep breaths, she tried to calm herself, tried to convince herself that she was doing the right thing. How do you know that song, my daughter? How could the white auntie have sung it to you? Did she say anything else about the river? About what we need to do when we get there? Ivy shrugged with the typical innocence of a 5-year-old, as if conversing with apparitions was the most natural thing in the world. She said the river holds secrets, Mummy. Secrets that can make me well again. She said you two were happy here before the water got mad at you. A chill ran down Delilah's spine. Ivy's words were simple but laden with a knowledge the little girl could not possess. Overcoming her own fear, Delilah stepped out of the car and opened the rear door, helping Ivy get out. The place was exactly as Delilah remembered, and yet completely different. The trees seemed denser, taller, forming a green cathedral around the river that snaked peacefully between moss-covered rocks. The sound of running water was almost like a melody, hypnotic and inviting. There was no one in sight. The once popular spot among local families had been practically forgotten after several accidents over the years. Are you sure you want to do this, my daughter? We can go back home now. We can look for other doctors, other options. We don't need to rely on something we don't understand. Ivy didn't seem to have heard. Her eyes were fixed on the path leading to the riverbank, as if she could see something Delilah couldn't see. The girl still looked frail. Her illness hadn't completely disappeared, but there was a new strength in her movements, a determination that didn't match her small body. Delilah hesitated to follow her daughter. The fear of water, a terror she had cultivated since Marigold's death, paralyzed her legs. Images of that fateful day flooded her mind, the sudden storm, the rapidly rising waters, Marigold's scream as the current swept her away. Delilah had survived by clinging to a branch, helplessly watching as her twin sister disappeared into the raging waters. By the time she came to, Ivy was already several meters away, determinedly walking towards the bank. "Ivy! Wait! My daughter! Don't get so close to the water. Please come back here right now, it's dangerous." Panic gave Delilah the strength she needed to overcome her fear. She ran after her daughter, stumbling over roots and stones, her heart pounding painfully in her chest. When she reached Ivy, the girl was already on the riverbank, gazing in fascination at the tranquil waters that reflected the blue sky like a perfect mirror. Delilah grabbed Ivy's arm, pulling her away from the water. Tears streamed down Delilah's face as memories repressed for 15 years came back with full force. She fell to her knees, still holding Ivy, her body shaken by uncontrollable sobs. "Ivy, you don't understand. This place, this river. This is where I lost my sister. Marigold was my twin. We were inseparable. We grew up playing on these banks, building sandcastles, catching frogs, imagining we were mermaids when we swam in the shallow parts. She drowned here at 16. We were supposed to stay home that day. The sky was darkening. My parents warned us about the approaching storm, but I insisted on coming. I said it would be quick, that we'd feel the rain before it got dangerous. It was all my fault, all my fault. She made me promise before we left that day that we would always come back here, that this place would always be our sanctuary. I never kept that promise. I never came back after the funeral." Ivy looked at her mother with an expression that mingled childlike confusion and an understanding that seemed far beyond her 5 years. Gently, she wiped the tears from Delilah's face with her little hands. "Aunt Marigold isn't mad at you, Mum. She's sad because she was alone for a long time. She said it wasn't your fault, that the river was sick that day like I am sick now, but she learned how to heal the river, and now she wants to heal me too." Ivy's words struck Delilah like a revelation. There was no way the little girl could know these details, no way to invent a story so aligned with the reality Delilah had kept buried for so many years. It was as if Marigold were truly speaking through Ivy, trying to reach her sister after so long. Before Delilah could respond, Ivy suddenly stood up, her eyes fixed on a spot in the middle of the river. "Look, Mommy, Aunt Marigold is waving. She's right there, in the middle of the water." Delilah followed Ivy's gaze, but she couldn't see anything beyond the calm surface of the river. However, as she watched, something inexplicable began to happen. In the center of the river, where the water should have been still or flowing smoothly, a small whirlpool formed. It was impossible on such a calm day, with no wind, no recent rain that could have increased the current. The whirlpool grew slowly, a perfect spiral on the water's surface, as if an invisible hand were stirring the river with a giant finger. Delilah felt her blood run cold in her veins. It wasn't natural, it wasn't possible. It was a sign, a call from something that existed beyond human comprehension. Before she could react, Ivy broke free from her protective embrace and began walking towards the water, her tiny bare feet leaving marks in the damp sand of the bank. Her movements were rigid, almost mechanical, as if she were in a trance. "Ivy! No! Come back here right now, it's dangerous, my daughter. Please don't go into the water, Ivy." Delilah ran after her daughter, terror giving wings to her feet. She grabbed Ivy by the waist when the girl was already ankle-deep in the water. What happened next defied everything Delilah believed possible. Ivy, the frail child who could barely walk without help just 2 days ago, began to struggle violently in her mother's arms. A supernatural force seemed to have taken over her little body, making her writhe and fight, with an intensity that Delilah could barely contain. Ivy's nails, normally so short and fragile, scratched Delilah's face, leaving red trails on her cheeks. The girl's eyes were different. Her dilated pupils almost covered her entire iris, and there was a wild determination in her gaze that didn't belong to a 5-year-old child. Then, when she opened her mouth to speak, it wasn't Ivy's sweet, childlike voice that came out, but a deeper, more adult tone with a cadence that made Delilah's heart stop for a second. "She says she knows how to cure me, Mommy. Let me go. The water will cleanse me. It will remove the sickness that consumes me from the inside. Please, Mommy, this is my only chance. Let me go to her." The struggle between mother and daughter led them deeper and deeper into the river. The water, which had previously only reached Ivy's ankles, now reached Delilah's waist. The panic she felt at being in the same place where Marigold died almost made her faint. Flashes of the last time she had been in those waters invaded her mind, mingling with the terror of the present. The sensation of the icy water enveloping her body brought back the trauma of that stormy afternoon 15 years ago, when the same waters tore her sister from her arms. But even overwhelmed by fear, Delilah didn't let go of Ivy. She struggled to keep them both afloat, to retreat to the shore, to escape the hypnotic influence the river seemed to exert over her daughter. "I won't lose you too. I won't let this river take anyone else I love. Marigold, if you can hear me, if you're really there, please don't do this to my daughter. She's just a child like we were. Please, there has to be another way." Suddenly, a figure emerged from the water beside them. Delilah screamed, thinking it was the apparition of Marigold coming to claim her daughter, but it was a man, alive and real, diving in to help them. With strong, precise strokes, he reached Delilah and Ivy, helping them back to the shore. Ivy had stopped struggling, her small body now limp and exhausted in her mother's arms. The man, around 40 years old, with graying hair at his temples and penetrating eyes behind thin-framed glasses, looked at the girl with concern as he helped her sit on the grassy riverbank. He introduced himself as Dr. Nolan Hawthorne, a physician from the regional hospital, who had been fishing a little further upstream when he heard the screams. His professional eyes evaluated Ivy, noting her pallor, the extreme thinness of her limbs, the evident signs of a chronic illness. Then his gaze turned to Delilah, registering the fresh scratches on her face, the terror in her eyes, the uncontrollable trembling of her hands. "Mom, what happened here? Did the girl have some kind of seizure? You both need urgent medical attention. Why were you entering the river? This place is not safe, especially for a child in such a fragile state. Please let me help you." A tense interrogation followed on the riverbank. Delilah tried to explain what had brought them there without sounding completely insane, omitting Marigold's apparition and the poison, mentioning only Ivy's illness and a feeling that the river might bring some kind of relief, a family story, an ancient tradition. Dr. Nolan listened attentively, but his skeptical gaze made it clear that he did not fully believe the story. Then, when Delilah mentioned her last name, Whitmore, something changed in the doctor's expression. A spark of recognition, followed by a professional intensity that was not there before. "Whitmore? Did you say Whitmore? Are you by any chance related to Teresa Whitmore? Your daughter exhibits all the symptoms of Whitmore-Herrera syndrome, an extremely rare condition I have been studying for the past 5 years. It was named after the first documented patient and the doctor who identified it. It's a genetic disease that primarily affects girls, causing progressive deterioration of the internal organs. If Ivy truly has this condition, it would explain why conventional treatments haven't worked. We're developing an experimental study at the regional hospital that has shown promising results in similar cases. Mrs. Whitmore, this may seem like an impossible chance, but finding you here today could be the best thing that could have happened for your daughter." Dr. Nolan's words sounded like a symphony of hope in Delilah's ears. Could it be possible? Could it be that Marigold had led Ivy to the river precisely to find this doctor? This chance at a cure that they would never have discovered otherwise? The coincidence seemed too great to be mere chance. Delilah felt tears of relief well up in her eyes as she watched the doctor gently and precisely examine Ivy, explaining more details about the experimental study, how he was specifically looking for patients with this rare condition. It was as if a path was opening up before them, a possibility that hadn't existed 24 hours earlier. Dr. Nolan helped them to their feet, suggesting they should go to the hospital immediately for preliminary exams. Ivy, who had remained strangely quiet throughout the entire conversation, now seemed more alert, more present, as if she had returned from somewhere distant. "He seems nice, Mom. Aunt Marigold said he'll help me, that he knows things other doctors don't know. She said he has a good heart like yours." They began walking back to the car, Delilah supporting Ivy on one side, Dr. Nolan on the other. The girl seemed weaker now, as if the episode at the river had drained the renewed energy she had displayed that morning. When they were almost reaching the makeshift parking area, Ivy suddenly stopped. Her little body went rigid, her head tilted back as if pulled by an invisible thread. Her eyes rolled back, showing only the whites, and before Delilah or Dr. Nolan could react, the girl collapsed. Dr. Nolan caught her in his arms before she hit the ground, his professional expression unable to completely hide the alarm he felt. Delilah screamed, kneeling beside her daughter, calling her name in desperation. For a moment it seemed that Ivy would not respond, that she had departed forever. Then her lips moved, but again it was not her voice that came out. It was a deeper, older tone with a cadence that sent chills even through the pragmatic Dr. Nolan. Aunt Marigold said, "You have until the next moon cycle to decide, or she'll take me with her forever." Delilah instinctively looked up at the sky. Through the treetops, she could see a thin sliver of the waxing crescent moon, almost new, just a delicate arc in the blue sky. The implication of the words was clear. Time was running out. Before she could fully process what was happening, Ivy began convulsing in the doctor's arms. Violent spasms shook her small body, making it arch unnaturally. Dr. Nolan carefully laid her down on the grass, turning her on her side and checking her airway, his years of medical training taking over. That's when it happened. From Ivy's mouth began to ooze a black viscous substance, foaming between her lips as if bubbling up from within. The smell was nauseating, a mixture of the poison Delilah had put in the soup and something more primal, more organic, like the mud from the river bottom. Dr. Nolan stared in shock at the substance, his scientific mind clearly unable to comprehend what he was seeing. Delilah, however, understood immediately. It was the poison being expelled from Ivy's body mixed with the essence of the river, as if the waters were purifying her daughter from the inside out. For the love of all saints, what is this? I have never seen anything like this in all my years of medicine. We need to take her to the hospital immediately. Something is very wrong. This is not a normal reaction to any condition I know. The white lights of the regional hospital corridor burned Delilah's eyes as she watched through a glass window the medical team frantically working around the gurney where Ivy lay. The journey from the river to the hospital had been a blur of sirens and lights, with Dr. Nolan Hawthorne driving at high speed while she held her daughter in the back seat, praying to every saint she knew. The strange signs that had appeared earlier had finally ceased, leaving Ivy in an unsettling silence, but the girl remained unconscious, her breathing irregular and shallow. Delilah pressed her forehead against the cold glass, feeling the weight of every decision she had made in the past few days. Guilt consumed her from within like acid, corroding any remnant of strength she might still have. Tears streamed freely down her face, blurring her vision, but she dared not avert her eyes from the small, motionless form under the white hospital sheets. "Please don't take my daughter. You can take me instead. You can punish me however you want, but don't take Ivy. She is innocent. She doesn't deserve to pay for my mistakes. Please, Marigold, if it was you who saved her from the poison, save her now too." The emergency room door finally opened, and Dr. Nolan came out with a grave expression on his face. His white coat had stains from the substance Ivy had expelled, and his eyes conveyed a mixture of professional perplexity and human compassion. He gently guided Delilah to a small private consultation room, closing the door behind them to isolate them from the curious gazes of the hospital staff. Sitting across from her, with his fingers interlocked on the table, he studied Delilah for a long moment before speaking. The preliminary exam results had arrived, and what they found defied any conventional medical explanation. There were clear traces of a potent poison in Ivy's system, a poison that should have been fatal within hours. Yet something inexplicable seemed to be neutralizing its effects, as if an antidote was being continuously released into the girl's bloodstream. "Mrs. Whitmore, I need you to be completely honest with me now. We found toxic substances in your daughter's body that have no natural explanation. They are traces of a specific poison, commonly used to eliminate rodents. However, something even more inexplicable is happening. The poison is being neutralized by an agent we cannot identify. I'm not here to judge, but I need to know exactly what happened so we can save Ivy. Please tell me the truth." Delilah's world crumbled with those words. She knew this moment would come, that she would have to face the consequences of her actions, but she was unprepared for the avalanche of emotions that hit her. Her shoulders sagged, and the deep sobs she had been trying to contain since they arrived at the hospital finally erupted, shaking her entire body. Between tears and broken words, Delilah confessed everything. The terminal diagnosis, the impossible medical bills, the desperate decision to end Ivy's suffering, the poison in the soup, and then the inexplicable, Marigold's apparition, Ivy's sudden recovery, the call to the river. She poured it all out, every dark detail of her terrible decision and the supernatural events that followed, uncaring whether the doctor deemed her insane or criminal. It was as if a dam had burst within her, releasing not only the confession of the poisoning, but 15 years of guilt over Marigold's death. Doctor. Nolan listened to everything without interrupting, his face remaining remarkably neutral, though his eyes registered every emotion that passed across Delilah's contorted face. I know I deserve to go to prison. I know I'm a monster for doing this to my own daughter. But I swear I only wanted to end her suffering. I couldn't bear to watch her wasting away day after day, knowing there was no hope, no treatment we could afford. And then Marigold appeared, and everything changed. I know it sounds crazy. I know ghosts don't exist. But she saved my daughter from the poison I gave her. She guided us to the river, to you. Please believe me. The silence that followed Delilah's confession seemed endless. Dr. Nolan rose slowly, walking to the window. His rigid back did not reveal what he was thinking, whether he had already decided to call the police, whether he considered her a criminal or just a mother distraught by desperation. When he finally turned around, his expression had subtly changed. There was a determination in his eyes that had not been there before. Instead of the condemnation Delilah expected, Dr. Nolan sat back down and began explaining about an experimental treatment his laboratory had been developing for Ivy's rare genetic condition. Whitmore-Herrera syndrome, named in part after the first documented patient, predominantly affected girls of Latin American descent, causing progressive deterioration of internal organs. The experimental protocol involved a revolutionary gene therapy that had shown promising results in preclinical studies, but had not yet been approved for widespread use for being considered too experimental. The fact that Ivy showed improvements after contact with the river water was not only intriguing from a medical standpoint, it was potentially valuable for his research. Normally, I would be required to immediately report an attempted poisoning to the authorities. What you did was extremely serious, regardless of your intentions. But I am also a doctor, and my primary commitment is to life and the well-being of my patients. So I believe Ivy could greatly benefit from our experimental protocol. In fact, she may be the perfect candidate considering her unusual response to the poison. I am not saying I will ignore what you confessed, but perhaps we could prioritize Ivy's treatment before deciding on the next steps. A fragile flame of hope bloomed in Delilah's chest. She wasn't expecting compassion. She didn't deserve a second chance after what she had done. And yet there it was, a possibility of redemption, a chance to save her daughter. Dr. Nolan explained that the experimental treatment was complex and would require Ivy to remain in the hospital for several weeks, with constant monitoring and frequent adjustments to the protocol. He would be the attending physician for the case, working directly with a small team of specialists who were already familiar with the research. Delilah listened attentively, nodding fervently, ready to accept any condition that could help Ivy. When Dr. Nolan presented the consent forms, she could barely hold the pen, her hands shaking uncontrollably. Page after page of incomprehensible medical terminology, potential risks, and experimental procedures, all blurred by the tears that wouldn't stop falling. She signed each indicated line without hesitation. Nothing mattered more than this chance, this last hope for her daughter. I'll do anything. Sign any document. Submit Ivy to any procedure that might save her. I have nothing left to lose, Dr. Nolan. I was once willing to end her life to avoid her suffering. Now I'm willing to make any sacrifice to give her a chance to live. Please just tell me there is real hope, that this isn't merely compassion on your part. When she reached the last page, Delilah finally found what she feared, the cost of the experimental treatment. The number was so astronomical it seemed almost fictional, an amount she could never accumulate even in several lifetimes of hard work. Her heart sank, the momentary hope quickly fading away. Dr. Nolan, noticing her expression, leaned forward, speaking in a low voice as if afraid of being overheard even in that private room. He explained that there was a possibility of including Ivy in the experimental protocol's free study group, selected patients whose treatment would be funded by the university itself and research grants in exchange for valuable data to advance the study. However, this would require approval from the Medical Ethics Committee, a process that usually took weeks. Even more complicated, it would require him to temporarily remain silent about the poisoning incident, an omission that clearly tormented him from a professional and ethical standpoint. His face reflected the internal conflict, the duty to report a serious crime against a child versus the possibility of saving that same child through treatment that could be denied if the case were made public immediately. I will be absolutely clear, Mrs. Whitmore. What I am considering doing, delaying the report of the attempted poisoning to prioritize Ivy's treatment, goes against strict hospital protocols. It could cost me my medical license, my entire career. But I cannot ignore the fact that your daughter presents a unique response that may not only save her life, but potentially advance our understanding of this syndrome and help other children in the future. I'm not promising impunity, understand that. I am merely suggesting that we treat Ivy's illness first and then deal with the rest. While waiting for Ivy to be transferred to an observation room after the emergency procedures, Delilah was led to a small waiting room overlooking the room where her daughter would be installed. The glass separating the waiting room from the room allowed her to observe Ivy without entering, a precaution Delilah understood to be both for her daughter's protection and a subtle way of keeping her under surveillance. Ivy was awake now, sitting on the hospital bed looking surprisingly better than when they arrived. Color had returned to her cheeks, and her eyes seemed more alive and alert than they had been in months. The most disturbing part, however, was that the girl appeared to be animatedly conversing, gesturing and smiling at an empty space beside her bed. Ivy's lips moved in silent conversation, her expressions changing as if she were responding to questions or comments from someone only she could see. Delilah felt a chill run down her spine. She knew exactly who her daughter was talking to, even if she couldn't see the apparition. A middle-aged nurse entered the room to check Ivy's vitals, smiling kindly as she adjusted the heart monitor and checked the girl's temperature. That's when it happened. Ivy pointed at Delilah through the glass, saying something to the nurse that made the woman instantly freeze. The nurse's expression transformed from professional and kind to horrified in a matter of seconds. She looked at Delilah as if she were seeing a monster, her eyes wide with shock and revulsion. No, what did Ivy tell her? What did Marigold make my daughter say? Please don't let this happen, not now that we finally have a chance. The nurse hurriedly left the room, casting one last terrified look at Delilah before disappearing down the hallway. Minutes that felt like hours ticked by, and Delilah remained paralyzed in the waiting room, feeling like a caged animal awaiting its sentence. When the door to the ward finally opened, it wasn't just the nurse returning, but several hospital staff, other nurses, a security guard, a suited man who appeared to be an administrator. They all looked at Delilah with expressions ranging from judgment to fear to revulsion, as if she was some kind of aberration, a criminal of the worst kind. The tension in the small space was palpable, electric, no one wanting to be the first to speak, to accuse, to condemn. In the confusion of that terrible moment, the nurse stumbled slightly, and her cell phone slipped from her pocket, falling to the floor with a dull thud. The device slid until it stopped near Delilah's feet. On the screen, a video was paused. Apparently, the nurse had recorded Ivy without permission, perhaps intuiting that something strange was happening. Delilah could clearly see the frozen frame, her daughter's innocent face looking directly into the camera, her lips forming words that chilled her blood. Even without sound, Delilah could read perfectly what Ivy had said. "This is my mother. She put poison in my soup to make me sleep forever. It wasn't like that. It wasn't like that. I just wanted to end her suffering. I didn't want her to continue in agony. You don't understand. You didn't see what I saw. You didn't feel what I felt. Please let Dr. Nolan explain. He knows about her condition. He understands why I did what I did." Panic seized Delilah like an overwhelming wave. The accusing looks, the horrified whispers, the phone on the floor with the damning evidence that it all combined into a nightmare from which she couldn't escape. Taking advantage of a moment of confusion, when the administrator began to argue heatedly with the nurse about the unauthorized recording, Delilah slowly backed towards the door. Her maternal instinct screamed for her to run to Ivy's room, to take her daughter in her arms and flee from there, but she knew that was impossible. Ivy's chances depended on Dr. Nolan's experimental treatment, and Delilah couldn't risk ruining that last hope. Instead, she decided in a split second that she needed time to think, to plan, to find a way to protect Ivy while facing the inevitable consequences of her actions. With her heart pounding painfully against her chest, she slid out of the waiting room and walked briskly down the hallway, trying to appear calm and determined, as if she were merely going to the bathroom or cafeteria. "I just need a few hours to think, to find a solution. I can't be arrested now. Ivy needs me. Dr. Nolan will understand. He promised to help. He knows I'm not a monster. Just a few hours, that's all I ask." Reaching the main lobby of the hospital, Delilah realized with growing despair that her escape options were rapidly dwindling. 2 security guards were strategically positioned near the main doors, apparently casually conversing, but their watchful eyes scanned every person passing by. One of them brought his hand to the radio clipped to his belt, and Delilah overheard fragments of a description being broadcast. Dark hair, about 30 years old, stained blue blouse. They were describing her. With her heart in her throat, Delilah abruptly changed direction, heading for a side exit she had noticed when they arrived. Through the glass doors of the lobby, she saw something that made her blood run cold. An official child services car pulling up at the emergency entrance. That meant the hospital had already made the formal report that the bureaucratic machinery of child protection was being set in motion. If she was detained now, Ivy would be immediately placed in state custody, perhaps transferred to another hospital, losing her chance at the experimental treatment with Dr. Nolan. The decision formed instantly in her mind. She needed to flee, buy time, find a way to ensure Ivy received the treatment before the authorities intervened. "Forgive me, daughter, for leaving you now. I'm not abandoning you, I swear. I'll find a way to come back, to ensure you get Dr. Nolan's treatment. Marigold, if you're listening, if you really came back to help us, protect our girl until I return." With an outward calm that masked the absolute terror she felt inside, Delilah pushed open a door marked "Emergency Exit." The alarm she expected didn't sound. Perhaps it was deactivated. Perhaps her only stroke of luck in days of nightmare. The employee parking lot was nearly empty at that hour, with only a few scattered cars under the fading evening light. Delilah zigzagged between the vehicles, staying low, aware that every second was precious before her absence was noticed. She managed to reach the side street unseen and immediately got into a passing taxi. Throughout the ride home, Delilah couldn't shake the feeling of being followed. Every car that stayed too long behind them, every police cruiser that passed in the opposite direction, every pedestrian who looked too long at the taxi, everything seemed like a threat, a pursuer, someone who knew what she had done and was just waiting for the right moment to apprehend her. The taxi driver tried to strike up casual conversation a few times, commenting on the weather or the traffic, but Delilah's monosyllabic responses eventually discouraged him. When they finally reached her building, Delilah hurriedly paid, leaving a far too generous tip that made the man look suspiciously at the crumpled bills. "Something's wrong. Something's not right. That black car wasn't parked here when we left this morning. And why is the lobby light on so early? Someone has been here. Someone came looking for me." Climbing the stairs instead of using the elevator, Delilah arrived on her floor out of breath. The hallway was strangely silent, without the usual sound of televisions or conversations coming from the other apartments. As she approached her door, the first thing she noticed was that it was ajar. Just a few inches, but enough to know that someone had been there. With her heart pounding, she slowly pushed the door open, bracing herself to find police officers, social workers, or even reporters invading her privacy. However, the apartment was empty, silent as a tomb but clearly ransacked. Drawers open, papers scattered, the family photo album rifled through and left open on the table. The late afternoon light streamed in through the windows, casting elongated shadows that seemed like accusing fingers pointing at Delilah. In the center of the kitchen table, where less than 24 hours earlier she had served poisoned soup to her daughter, was an official envelope. Delilah approached it as if walking to the gallows, each step heavier than the last. With trembling fingers, she opened the envelope and removed the document, an official notice of investigation for attempted homicide, with her full name printed in cold, impersonal letters. Along with it was a warrant for preventive arrest and a temporary loss of custody of Ivy. Delilah's world completely crumbled in that moment, turning into an abyss of despair from which there seemed no escape. It's over. It's all over. They're going to arrest me. They're going to take Ivy away from me forever. Marigold, why did you bring me here only to lose everything again? Why give me hope just to snatch it away from me one more time? The fluorescent lights in the interrogation room buzzed annoyingly over Delilah's head, casting harsh shadows that highlighted every worry line on her exhausted face. Her handcuffed hands rested on the cold metal table, her wrists already marked by the pressure of the metal. The arrest had been swift and relentless, police officers knocking on her door merely an hour after returning to the apartment, with no chance of escape or explanation. Now sitting in that uncomfortable chair for what seemed like hours, Delilah watched Detective Ron Bellamy slowly pace around the table, alternating between looks of genuine compassion and harsh accusation. Through the two-way mirror, she could feel the eyes of the social worker, Mrs. Evelyn, analyzing her every move, every expression, every tremor of her hands. The detective opened a folder and spread photographs across the table, the bottle of poison found in her trash, covered in fingerprints that had already been confirmed as hers. Screenshots from the video recorded by the nurse, clearly showing Ivy revealing the poisoning. Signed statements from neighbors reporting nighttime screams and erratic behavior. Mrs. Whitmore, I understand you're going through a difficult time, that desperation can lead good people to terrible actions. But I need to hear it from you. Why did you try to poison your own daughter? A 5-year-old girl, defenseless, who trusted you more than anyone else in the world. How could you do that? Delilah closed her eyes for a moment, trying to organize her thoughts, searching for words that could make sense of the inexplicable. When she opened them again, she began to speak about everything. About Ivy's terminal diagnosis, about the impossible medical bills, about the constant pain her daughter endured. But then her narrative took a turn that she knew would further complicate her situation. She spoke of Marigold, of the river, of the supernatural apparition, of the mysterious healing. As the words came out, she could see the detective's expression changing, skepticism giving way to concern, then pity, as if he were listening to the ravings of a disturbed mind. Delilah was speaking faster now, desperate for them to believe her, to understand that something beyond human comprehension was happening. Her words stumbled over one another, stories of voices from beyond, ghostly hands at windows, healing rivers, promises made to the dead. Detective Ron Bellamy exchanged a significant look with the mirror, a look Delilah immediately recognized as confirmation of insanity. I know it sounds crazy. I know no one would believe me. But I swear it's true. Marigold came back to help Ivy, to give us a chance to save her. The poisoning was a terrible mistake, the worst mistake of my life, but something prevented it from working. Something is protecting my daughter. Mrs. Whitmore, the detective spoke with a suddenly softer voice sitting across from her. We have access to your family's medical history. Your twin sister Marigold suffered from hallucinations and psychotic episodes before her suicide, correct? The records indicate there was a hereditary component to her condition, something that can be passed down genetically. He flipped through some documents in his folder, stopping at a specific page. The report from the doctor who treated Marigold suggests you also underwent evaluations as a teenager, though you never presented symptoms as severe as your sister's. Marigold's visions, these beliefs about supernatural cures, are they manifestations of the same disorder? The words struck Delilah like a physical blow. Is it possible that the extreme stress of Ivy's illness, combined with your genetic predisposition, has triggered similar episodes to what your sister experienced? She had never considered this possibility, never questioned the reality of what she had seen and experienced over the past few days. The doubt now planted in her mind was almost as painful as the accusation of attempted homicide. Could it be possible? Could everything, Marigold's apparition, the mysterious cure, the voices, the signs, be mere fabrications of a mind on the verge of collapse? No, it's not that. I'm not crazy. I'm not imagining things. How do you explain the poison that didn't work? How do you explain Ivy improving after being on the brink of death? Asked Dr. Nolan Hawthorne. He saw something in the river. He found unexplainable substances in her blood. The scene abruptly changed as Delilah was transferred from the police station to the social services office. The setting was less austere, with pastel-colored walls attempting to create a welcoming atmosphere that failed miserably in its intent given the circumstances. Still handcuffed, Delilah was seated before Ms. Evelyn, a middle-aged woman with a severe expression and eyes that seemed to have witnessed every horror parents are capable of inflicting on children. The social worker methodically organized a stack of documents on the desk: medical reports, preliminary psychological evaluations, Ivy's school records, all culminating in a recommendation report for permanent removal of custody. Each page turned was like a stab in Delilah's heart. Desperate, she leaned forward, pleading through tears to see her daughter, to have just a few minutes with Ivy, to explain, to apologize, to say goodbye if necessary. Mrs. Evelyn remained impassive, merely responding that the child's well-being was her sole concern and that all indications pointed to a dangerously inadequate domestic environment. Please, Mrs. Evelyn, Ivy needs me. I made a terrible, unforgivable mistake, but my daughter needs me now more than ever. She's sick, she's dying without proper treatment. I can't lose her like this. I can't leave her alone in a hospital with strangers. With a heavy sigh that suggested irritation rather than compassion, Mrs. Evelyn picked up a tablet and positioned it in front of Delilah. See for yourself how your daughter is, she said coldly, pressing play on a video. On the screen, Ivy appeared lying in a hospital bed, visibly weaker than the day before. Her skin had returned to a sickly pallor, and her breathing seemed labored, interrupted by fits of coughing that shook her small body. Most heart-wrenching, however, was hearing her repeatedly call out for her mother, asking in a faint voice when Delilah would come back to get her. Amidst the calls for mommy, though, there was something that made Mrs. Evelyn frown. Ivy was also murmuring about the aunt who lives in the river, asking her to come back, to not leave her alone, to keep her promise. The social worker paused the video on a frame where Ivy was looking directly into the camera, her large pleading eyes fixed in a silent accusation. As you can see, Mrs. Whitmore, your daughter is deteriorating rapidly without proper treatment. The doctors report that she refuses medication, insisting that only the river water can cure her. This is a direct result of what you've put into her head, these stories of mystical cures and ghost aunts. Be thankful we're prioritizing her medical treatment instead of focusing on the criminal charges against you. The mention of treatment sparked a glimmer of hope in Delilah's utter despair. Doctor, Nolan's experimental treatment. It was Ivy's only real chance, the only credible medical possibility for her rare condition. In a swift, desperate move that surprised even herself, Delilah abruptly stood up, causing the chair to fall back with a crash. Seizing the moment of shock from the social worker, she lunged toward the phone on the desk, managing to grab it with her still handcuffed hands before Miss Evelyn could react. Her fingers trembled as she dialed the number she had memorized at the hospital, Dr. Nolan Hawthorne's direct contact. The social worker yelled for help, but before the guards entered the room, Delilah managed to hear the doctor's voice on the other end of the line. The words poured out of her in a desperate, incoherent at times but clear in purpose flow, to beg him to confirm the experimental treatment, to explain to social services the vital importance of the procedure for Ivy. The guards grabbed her, trying to wrench the phone from her hands, but she resisted with a strength born of the purest maternal desperation. Dr. Nolan, please, tell them about the treatment. Tell them Ivy needs it to survive. They don't believe me. They think I'm crazy, but you saw, you know. Please don't let my daughter die because of my mistake. Mrs. Evelyn finally managed to get the phone, stepping away as the guards forced Delilah back into the chair. The social worker briefly spoke with Dr. Nolan, her expression subtly changing as she listened to the explanations on the other end of the line. Something in what the doctor was saying seemed to be having an impact, making her reconsider positions that had previously seemed irrevocable. When she hung up, the social worker looked at Delilah with a different gaze. Still severe, still distrustful, but with a new spark of consideration that hadn't been there before. Dr. Hawthorne confirmed that Ivy is a candidate for an experimental protocol that could treat her rare condition. He was quite emphatic about the urgency of the treatment, and she hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with what she was about to say. He also mentioned some test results that are, at the very least, unusual. Substances in her blood that do not match any known pattern, both the venom and an unidentified neutralizing agent. The social worker took a deep breath, as if making a difficult decision. "I will request an emergency hearing with Judge Clarice Langdon. This does not mean that I am disregarding the gravity of what you did, Mrs. Whitmore. The accusation of having put your own daughter's health at risk is still extremely serious. But perhaps, just perhaps, there is a way to ensure that Ivy receives the treatment she needs while you face the legal consequences of your actions." The next day, the courtroom was small and austere, used for emergency decisions related to the custody of minors. Judge Clarice Langdon, a woman in her 50s with piercing eyes that seemed to see through any lie, presided over the improvised session from her oak desk. Dr. Nolan was present, having come directly from the hospital to testify about Ivy's condition and the experimental protocol. Mrs. Thevelin presented the case for social services, while a hastily appointed public defender tried to argue on Delilah's behalf. The debate was intense and technical, with medical terms mingling with legal statutes on child custody and criminal liability. Delilah watched it all in a state of emotional torpor, as if she were watching a movie about someone else's life. Only when the judge began to announce her decision did she fully return to reality, each word resonating with the weight of a final sentence. "Having considered all the facts presented, I determine that the minor Ivy Whitmore shall remain in temporary state custody, receiving treatment at the regional hospital under the direct supervision of Dr. Nolan Hawthorne. The experimental protocol may proceed, considering the urgency of the minor's condition and the absence of viable treatment alternatives. As for Mrs. Delilah Whitmore, she will be released on bail, with the condition of wearing an electronic ankle monitor and remaining at least 100 meters away from her daughter, except during supervised visits authorized by social services. This is a temporary solution until a full trial on the criminal charges and a definitive hearing on the minor's custody can be held." The electronic ankle monitor was fitted quickly and impersonally, a court technician adjusting the device to Delilah's ankle while mechanically reciting the restrictions and consequences of any attempt to remove or violate the established perimeter. The device weighed physically, but the true weight was psychological, a constant reminder of her fall, of her transformation from devoted mother to monitored criminal. The instructions for the first supervised visit were equally cold and procedural, only 1 hour in the constant presence of a social services representative, without physical contact beyond a brief initial and final hug, without discussing the case or attempting to influence the child's testimony. When she finally arrived at the hospital for the visit, Delilah found her daughter in a heartbreaking state. Ivy had visibly worsened, as if the separation from her mother had accelerated the progression of the disease. Her cheeks, which had regained color after the river episode, were once again hollow and pale. Her eyes, though lighting up upon seeing Delilah, were surrounded by deep circles. The permitted hug was painfully brief, closely monitored by the social worker assigned to supervise the meeting. "Mommy, you came back. I knew you would. I was so afraid you had left me here forever. They won't let me go to the river, Mommy. They say it's dangerous, but it's not true." "The water can heal me," Aunt Marigold said. Delilah sat carefully on the edge of the bed, aware of the watchful eyes of the social worker, observing every move, every word. Taking great care not to say anything that could be interpreted as perpetuating delusions or interfering with treatment, she gently talked to Ivy about trivial things: the drawings the girl had made in the hospital, the food she was getting, the nurses caring for her. Delilah noticed there were drawings of water everywhere, blue rivers snaking across the paper, white-clad female figures by the water's edge, waves and eddies in every available corner. Even in her effort to keep the conversation away from dangerous topics, it was Ivy who finally brought up what truly mattered. As the visitation time was nearly over, and the social worker was momentarily distracted by a message on her cell phone, the girl pulled Delilah closer with surprising strength. The unauthorized embrace during that moment of the visit was brief but intense. During those few seconds of closeness, Ivy whispered words into her mother's ear that made Delilah's blood run cold. Aunt Marigold got angry when they tried to separate us. She said, "You need to keep your promise soon, before it's too late for both of us." "She can't protect me much longer, Mum. The water is calling, but it's getting harder and harder to hear." Back in her empty apartment, Delilah felt the weight of the ankle monitor with every step, a constant reminder of her conditional freedom. Night had fallen completely, and she didn't bother turning on the lights, preferring the darkness that matched her mood. Physically and emotionally exhausted, Delilah finally succumbed to the sleep she had avoided for nearly 48 hours, falling into a restless torpor on the couch, still dressed and with her shoes on. She didn't know how long she had slept when a sound awoke her, the unmistakable dripping of water, continuous and rhythmic, like a metronome marking the running out of time. Still dazed from sleep, Delilah followed the sound to the bathroom, turning on the light with trembling fingers. The sight that greeted her wrenched a muffled scream from her throat. The bathroom was completely flooded, water overflowing from the sink and shower, running down the walls and forming a pool several inches deep on the floor. But it wasn't the flood that nearly stopped her heart. It was the message written on the fogged-up mirror, in a handwriting she instantly recognized as Marigold's. "Tick-tock, little sister." At the same time, her cell phone started ringing in the living room, the shrill sound cutting through the silence of the night like an alarm siren. With water up to her ankles, Delilah ran to answer, nearly slipping on the way. It was the hospital, informing her that Ivy had taken a sudden turn for the worse, developing a high fever and delirium, continuously calling for her Aunt Marigold and begging to go to the river. "Mrs. Whitmore, I know there are legal restrictions, but your daughter is insistently asking for you. The doctors believe your presence may help calm her down. Please come as soon as possible. We've already notified social services about the emergency." Before she could respond, Delilah heard a sound at the front door, something being slid under the door. Still holding the phone, she slowly walked down the dark hallway, feeling the fear grow with each step. On the floor, an unmarked manila envelope had been delivered, damp as if it had been recently wetted. With trembling hands, Delilah picked it up and tore one side open, spilling its contents onto the kitchen table. An old bronze key, with an intricate design on the handle. A key she had never seen before, but which somehow seemed strangely familiar. Next to the key, a yellowed newspaper clipping dated 15 years ago. The headline made her stomach churn. "Teenage girl found dead leaves letter accusing twin sister." The accompanying photos showed Marigold's face, identical to her own, staring directly into the camera in a school photograph. The article mentioned a letter found among Marigold's belongings, accusing Delilah of abandoning her when she needed her most, of breaking the most important promise, and ending with a chilling prophecy. "One day, when you need me most, I won't be there. And then you'll understand what it means to be abandoned by your other half." Delilah let the newspaper drop, her legs buckling under the weight of the revelation. Your entire life since Marigold's death had been built on the belief that your sister had committed suicide in a tragic impulse, a victim of her mental illness. You never knew about the letter, never imagined that Marigold blamed you so directly, that she had left with so much resentment in her heart. What did I do? My God, Marigold, what did I do to you? And what are you doing now with my daughter? Why come back after all this time? What does this key mean? What else have you hidden from me all these years? The old key burned in Delilah's palm as she faced Mrs. Evelyn across the desk at the social services office. The electronic anklet on her ankle felt like it weighed a ton, constantly reminding her of her conditional release, but her determination was stronger than any physical restraint. 3 days had passed since the emergency hearing, and Ivy's condition continued to deteriorate in the hospital, resisting conventional treatment while they awaited final approval for the experimental protocol. With her eyes fixed on the social workers, Delilah presented her case with a calmness that did not reflect the inner turmoil consuming her. The old family home, abandoned for over a decade, could contain crucial medical records about the family's history of illness, information that would help Dr. Nolan refine Ivy's treatment. Mrs. Evelyn, who in recent supervised visits had witnessed the girl's increasing suffering, listened with a less severe expression than before. Please understand that I'm not asking this for myself, but for Ivy. If there are medical documents in that house that could help with her treatment, we need to find them now before it's too late. This key appeared for a reason, and I believe Marigold is trying to guide us to something important, something that could save my daughter. The drive to the Whitmore family home was silent, the tension palpable inside the official social services car. The old residence stood on the outskirts of town, a colonial-style mansion that had once been elegant, but now displayed all the marks of abandonment, an overgrown garden, peeling paint, boarded-up windows in some places. Delilah felt her heart race as she saw her childhood home again, each detail evoking memories she had tried to bury for 15 years. The key turned with difficulty in the rusted lock, but eventually yielded with a metallic click that echoed through the silence of the property. As they pushed open the door, they were greeted by a cloud of dust and the characteristic smell of abandonment. Mrs. Evelyn turned on a flashlight, revealing furniture covered by sheets, like silent ghosts guarding long-forgotten secrets. Delilah walked down the main hallway in a trance, her fingers lightly brushing the walls, leaving trails in the accumulated dust. It's strange how everything seems smaller now, yet exactly as I remember. I can almost hear Marigold laughing, running through these corridors. How could we have left all this behind? How could I have simply fled after she was gone? The room Delilah had shared with Marigold throughout their childhood and adolescence was at the end of the hallway, the door closed, as if respecting the interrupted morning. With trembling hands, Delilah opened it, revealing 2 twin beds side by side, faded posters on the walls, a vanity with a cracked mirror between the dust-covered curtained windows. Mrs. Evelyn remained at the doorway, observing with a mixture of professional curiosity and respect for the obvious emotional weight of the moment. Delilah walked straight to the wall between the 2 beds, her fingers automatically finding the exact spot where a small imperfection marked the location of the secret hiding place. Pressing firmly, a rectangular panel gave way, revealing a hollow space where she and Marigold used to keep their most precious treasures: notes, smuggled sweets, little secrets shared only between twins. What she found there, however, was far more significant. A leather-bound diary in faded blue with Marigold's name engraved in golden letters, and beside it, an empty, unlabeled medicine bottle. My God, so it was here all along. All these years. She wanted me to find it, but I ran too far, too fast. Forgive me, Marigold, for taking so long to hear what you were trying to tell me. As Lady Evelyn walked away to examine other parts of the house in search of official medical records, Delilah sat on Marigold's old bed, the diary weighing in her hands like a confession. The first pages were typical of a teenager: crushes, school frustrations, dreams for the future. But the tone soon shifted drastically. Marigold described dizziness, memory lapses, disturbing visions that began as shadows in the corner of her eyes and gradually evolved into full-blown hallucinations. More disturbing still were the entries about conversations she had accidentally overheard between her parents late at night, discussions about the girl's condition, experimental medication, genetic predisposition, early manifestation in Marigold. The diary revealed that their parents had hidden from her and Delilah a terrible family secret. The rare disease that now afflicted Ivy was hereditary, passed down from mother to daughter for generations, but manifesting differently in each twin. Marigold had discovered that her parents were secretly medicating her, mixing experimental drugs into her food while monitoring her progression. Rage and betrayal oozed from the pages in increasingly erratic handwriting. They betrayed us, lied to us our entire lives. And you, Delilah, did you know too? Is that why you never got sick like me? Are they protecting you and using me as a guinea pig? Why do I have to suffer from these visions, these voices, this feeling of drowning from the inside? The final diary entries were the most disturbing, written just days before the fateful trip to the river. Marigold had confronted her parents after finding documents in her father's office, a scientist working for a major pharmaceutical company. Apparently, he was developing an experimental treatment for the family's genetic condition. using Marigold as an unofficial test subject, observing her reaction to the drugs he secretly put in her food. The betrayal had been too much to bear. In the penultimate entry, Marigold wrote about how she planned to run away, but not before confronting her parents one last time and revealing everything to Delilah. The final entry, dated the very day of her death, contained only a few urgently scribbled lines. Dad finally confessed everything. The source of the disease is in the river. The company dumped chemicals there for decades, contaminating the water we drank throughout our childhood. The treatment he was developing is forbidden, too experimental, too dangerous, but he believes it's the only hope. He said the cure is in the river itself, in something living in the water now adapted to the chemicals. I'm going to get Delilah. We'll go to the river one last time. If she didn't know anything, I'll tell her everything. If she knew all along, then the river will decide our fate. Oh God, Marigold, I never knew, I swear I never knew any of this. How could she? They had hidden everything from us too. And now Ivy is suffering from the same secret, the same family curse that no one had the courage to face. Mrs. Evelyn returned to the room, carrying a dusty box found in Delilah's father's office. Inside were dozens of folders with detailed medical records, not only of Marigold, but of generations of women from the Whitmore family, all exhibiting variations of the same degenerative neurological condition. Delilah, still dazed by the diary's revelations, explained to the social worker what she had discovered: the river contamination, the secret experiments, the fundamental betrayal that had driven Marigold to her final despair. Mrs. Evelyn listened to it all with an increasingly disturbed expression, occasionally nodding, as if pieces of a puzzle were finally fitting together. When Delilah finished her account, the social worker took a deep breath as if making a difficult decision, and confessed something that completely changed the dynamic between them. She had been Marigold's classmate, not just a casual acquaintance as she had previously suggested, but a close friend to whom Marigold had confided some of her suspicions in the weeks before her death. I always knew there was more to the story than a simple drowning, Delilah. Marigold was scared, but determined in the days before she died. She told me she had discovered something terrible about her family, about the company where her father worked. When I saw you at the hospital with Ivy, I recognized you immediately. The same appearance, the same family name. It was me who left the envelope with the key at your door. I thought it was time for the truth to come out for Ivy's sake. Determined to uncover more, Delilah convinced Mrs. Evelyn to make a stop at the Municipal Public Archives before returning to the hospital. The old building housed records dating back to the founding of the city, including court documents, property records, and archives of local newspapers. With the help of a sleepy employee who barely concealed his boredom, they located the section dedicated to reopened police cases, a surprisingly extensive file for a relatively small town. Marigold's case was there, a thick folder filled with reports, crime scene photographs, and yellowed newspaper clippings. What caught Delilah's attention, however, was a document dated just 3 months ago, an official request to reopen the case based on significant new forensic evidence. Attached was an exhumation report that chilled Delilah's blood. Marigold's body had been re-examined using technologies unavailable 15 years earlier, revealing the presence of an experimental chemical compound in the bone tissue. The description of the compound matched exactly the formula that Dr. Nolan was proposing to use in Ivy's treatment. How is this possible? This is the same medicine, the exact same formula. What my father was secretly developing 15 years ago is what Dr. Nolan has rediscovered now. And how did Marigold know? How could she have predicted that this would end up connected to my daughter so many years later? Mrs. Evelyn examined the documents with growing alarm, her social work training temporarily overshadowed by pure disbelief at the accumulating evidence. The story that was emerging was deeper and more painful than either of them could have imagined. It involved old secrets about environmental contamination, undisclosed medical decisions, and an unexplained death that could have been the result of negligence or desperate choices. Now that same experimental treatment, kept secret for so many years, resurfaced as a possible hope for the new generation. The most frightening aspect was the apparent supernatural connection, as if Marigold knew, even in death, that Ivy would eventually develop the same condition, as if she had planned everything, patiently waiting for her twin sister to finally uncover the truth she had tried to reveal on that fateful day. The final confirmation came when Mrs. Evelyn found a file marked confidential. She had been responsible for reopening the case 3 months earlier after repeatedly dreaming of a woman in white pleading for justice. I always thought they were just nightmares, guilt for never questioning the official version of my friend's death. But then I started seeing her face when I was awake, always near water, in puddles after rain reflected in shop windows, even in glasses of water in my office. That's when I decided to request the case be reopened. And then, just a few weeks later, you show up at the hospital with your daughter, the spitting image of Marigold suffering from the same condition. I don't believe in coincidences, Delilah. Your sister is trying to tell us something, trying to fix something that went terribly wrong 15 years ago. Delilah's cell phone rang stridently in the silence of the dusty archive. It was Dr. Nolan, his voice tense and urgent through the tiny speaker. Ivy had suffered a severe seizure during the preparatory exams for the experimental treatment. She was stabilized but had lapsed into a coma, her vital signs weak and irregular. The doctors were pessimistic, suggesting that the window of opportunity for the treatment might be closing. Delilah felt the world spinning around her, the revelations of the last few hours mingling with this new emergency in a whirlwind of panic and despair. Before she could respond to the doctor, all the lights in the archive suddenly went out, plunging the place into absolute, suffocating darkness. For a few seconds, the silence was complete, broken only by Delilah's and Mrs. Evelyn's quickened breathing. Then, with a low hum, the emergency lights came on, bathing the surroundings in an eerie red glow as the backup generators took over the power supply. It was at that moment, in that unnatural light, that Delilah saw her, reflected perfectly in the darkened archive window. Marigold, dressed in white, her face identical to Delilah's, but with an expression of urgency and determination that transcended the world of the living. The apparition wasn't looking at Delilah, but beyond her, toward the hospital where Ivy was fighting for her life. Marigold raised a pale hand, pointing eastward, and then began to walk, gradually fading like mist into the darkness. "It's her. Delilah, I'm seeing your sister. My God, I'm not crazy, I'm not imagining it. Marigold is really here." Mrs. Evelyn dropped her briefcase, documents scattering across the floor like leaves in the wind, her face reflecting the same terror and haunting as Delilah felt. For the first time, someone else had seen Marigold, confirming that the apparition was not merely a product of a mind tormented by guilt, but something real, something tangible that transcended normal understanding. "She's going to the hospital, to Ivy. We need to go now, immediately. Marigold knows something we haven't uncovered yet, something that could save my daughter before it's too late." Delilah and Mrs. Evelyn ran through the sterilized hospital hallways, ignoring protests from nurses and disapproving looks from other visitors. Delilah's electronic ankle bracelet emitted warning beeps, indicating she was violating her permitted perimeter, but none of that mattered now. They reached the entrance to the pediatric intensive care unit, only to be stopped by locked automatic doors and a nurse manager with an inflexible expression. Through the glass panel, they could see the medical team frantically moving around the small bed, where Ivy was connected to a labyrinth of tubes and wires. The monitors displayed alarming lines and numbers: blood pressure dropping, irregular heartbeats, insufficient oxygenation. "My daughter is dying in there. I need to get in. I need to be with her. You can't stop me from seeing her at this time, not when she needs me the most. Please look at her. She's getting worse every second." The door finally opened, revealing Dr. Nolan Hawthorne, his impeccably white coat contrasting with the deep bags under his eyes. He ushered Delilah and Mrs. Evelyn into a small adjacent consultation room, his grave expression making it clear that the news was not good. With the low, controlled voice of someone accustomed to delivering devastating information, he explained that Ivy had gone into systemic collapse. The tests revealed something inexplicable. The poison that should have been completely metabolized or neutralized had somehow remained dormant in her body, lodged in deep tissues. Now, as if activated by some mysterious trigger, it was back in the bloodstream. interacting catastrophically with the underlying genetic disease. The doctor's words were clinical, but his normally steady hands trembled slightly as he showed the test results. Her condition is critical, but there is still a chance. The experimental protocol based on the original research we found may neutralize both the poison and halt the progression of the disease. However, we need to act now. Minutes make a difference at this stage. We need immediate authorization from a legal guardian to initiate the unapproved treatment. Mrs. Evelyn, who had witnessed Marigold's appearance in the public archive and now faced Ivy's brutal condition, did not hesitate. She took the pen offered by Dr. Nolan and quickly signed the consent form, her decisive signature cutting through the paper like a statement of faith. As the doctor hurried back to the treatment unit with the authorization, Delilah grabbed the social worker's hand, her eyes brimming with thanks. For a moment, the two women were united by something more powerful than institutional regulations, the shared determination to save an innocent child, regardless of protocols or histories. Delilah pressed her face against the treatment unit's glass, watching Dr. Nolan relay instructions to his team, seeing the preparation of the experimental medication that could be Ivy's last hope. She will survive. She has to survive. Marigold would not have guided us here only to lose her now. There is a purpose to all of this, a reason for this cycle of pain and revelations. I need to believe that. As they waited in the small room adjacent to the intensive care unit, an elderly man with white hair and a slightly hunched posture approached, his gaze alternating between Delilah and the intensive care unit door. Something in his eyes, a mixture of guilt, recognition, and determination, instinctively made Delilah rise. The man introduced himself as Dr. Franklin Doyle, her father's former business partner at the pharmaceutical company and Marigold's personal physician during her adolescence. His presence there at that critical moment was no coincidence. He had been summoned by Dr. Nolan after recognizing his name in the medical records found at the Whitmore's old house. With a voice trembling from age and emotion, Dr. Doyle confessed his involvement in the clandestine experiments 15 years earlier, when the experimental drug was tested on Marigold without her knowledge or consent. Marigold had been one of the patients who experienced severe side effects, not only physical, but also psychological, including vivid hallucinations of a white-clad female figure calling her to the water. We didn't expect that kind of reaction. The medication seemed to be working, reducing the neurological symptoms, but then the hallucinations started. Marigold spoke about a woman who lived in the river, someone who looked like her, who said she knew the truth about the disease. We thought it was just a psychotic side effect. We never considered that it could be something more, something that transcended our limited scientific understanding. The elderly doctor explained that Delilah's father had secretly continued working on the formula after the tragedy, developing an improved version intended to eliminate the psychological side effects while maintaining the therapeutic properties. The pharmaceutical company, however, had officially shut down the project after the Marigold death scandal, fearing lawsuits and government investigations. Delilah's father, consumed by guilt over the role his unauthorized experiment played in his daughter's death, dedicated his final years to refining the treatment in clandestine laboratories, always preparing for the day when the disease could manifest in Delilah or her potential offspring. Dr. Doyle removed a small flash drive from his coat pocket, extending it with trembling hands toward Delilah. "Your father gave me this before he died 5 years ago. He made me promise to keep it safe until it was needed, to only deliver it if the disease resurfaced in the family. It contains all the data from the subsequent research, the modifications to the formula, the results of the tests we secretly conducted. It's the work of a lifetime dedicated to correcting a terrible mistake, Delilah. It may be your daughter's only real chance." With the flash drive clutched tightly in her hand, Delilah rushed to the intensive care unit, pleading to deliver the device to Dr. Nolan. The physician, recognizing the urgency of the situation, connected the flash drive to a computer in the room and quickly began analyzing the data, his eyes widening as he absorbed the information contained in the files. Within minutes, he had adapted the original protocol, incorporating the modifications developed by Delilah's father over years of obsessive research. Mrs. Evelyn signed an additional authorization, and the head nurse prepared the infusion of the revised medication. Delilah and the social worker were allowed to enter the intensive care room, properly gowned with sterilized gowns, masks, and gloves. They approached the bedside where Ivy lay unconscious, her skin so pale it appeared translucent under the harsh hospital lights. Dr. Nolan personally administered the first dose of the medication, injecting the crystalline liquid into the catheter, already installed in the girl's arm. This is the moment of truth. Seconds matter now. Every drop of this medicine can make the difference between life and death. Be prepared for any reaction. Seizures are possible, as well as changes in vital signs. We will be monitoring every heartbeat, every breath. The silence was broken only by the rhythmic beeping of the monitors and the soft humming of the medical equipment. Everyone's eyes were fixed on Ivy's vital signs, looking for any sign of improvement or deterioration. Suddenly, without any warning, all the machines began to fail simultaneously. The monitors flickered, turned off and turned back on in random sequences. The ceiling lights fluctuated violently, plunging the environment into disorienting stroboscopic flashes. The temperature in the room dropped drastically in a matter of seconds, to the point that their breaths formed small clouds of condensation in the air. Alarms went off, nurses ran to check equipment, doctors shouted contradictory instructions. In the midst of absolute chaos, Delilah saw something that froze the blood in her veins. Marigold, more clearly visible than she had ever been, materialized beside Ivy's bedside. She was no longer a translucent or ethereal figure, but solid and real like any living person in the room. She was holding Ivy's hand with a fierce expression of determination, her lips moving in silent words that seemed like some kind of spell or prayer. To the utter shock of everyone present, Ivy suddenly opened her eyes. Her gaze was clear and focused, without a trace of the torpor of someone emerging from a coma. When she spoke, her voice was not childlike but resonant and powerful, filling the room despite its low volume. She wants you to return to the river on the new moon, this time for one last dive. Ivy's eyes closed again, her body relaxing against the pillows as the heart monitor alarm sounded in a continuous, piercing tone, indicating a lack of heartbeats. "No, Ivy! My love, don't leave us! Marigold, please, don't take my daughter!" "I'll do anything. Go wherever needed. Dive into any depth. Just let her live." The miracle had happened. After 3 minutes of cardiopulmonary resuscitation, Ivy's heart began beating again. Dr. Nolan called it an inexplicable medical resurrection, but Delilah knew forces beyond science had intervened. A week after the incident, with Ivy stabilized but still in critical condition, the judge authorized a temporary release for Delilah. Accompanied by Mrs. Evelyn, she now stood before the elegant suburban home where her parents had taken refuge after the Marigold tragedy, rebuilding their lives away from the memories and accusations. Delilah took a deep breath before ringing the doorbell, the flash drive with her father's data burning in her pocket like a silent accusation. So many years avoiding this moment, fleeing this conversation. My daughter nearly died because I never had the courage to confront them, to demand the truth. Today that ends, no matter how painful it may be. The reception was as cold as expected. Her mother, Margot Whitmore, now a grey-haired woman with empty eyes that seemed to have cried all possible tears long ago, could barely look at her surviving daughter. Her father, Henry Whitmore, once a respected scientist, was now merely a shadow of the man he had been, his shoulders hunched, his face marred by alcohol, his hands trembling even in the early hours of the day. The initial conversation was stiff, superficial, until Delilah mentioned Ivy's illness and showed them the data on the flash drive. It was as if a dam had burst. Her mother collapsed into violent sobs that seemed to come from the depths of her soul, while her father fell heavily into the armchair, his face transformed by a mixture of horror and resignation. So it finally happened. The curse has passed to another generation. I prayed it would die with me, that the secret would be buried along with my research, but I always knew the river would demand its price again. Between ragged sobs and painful confessions, the full story emerged. The illness was hereditary, passed down exclusively through the Whitmore women for 4 generations. It typically manifested during puberty, or in rare cases like Ivy's in early childhood. The cause, however, was not natural, but rather the result of a heinous environmental crime. The pharmaceutical company where Henry worked had secretly dumped experimental chemical compounds into the river for decades, contaminating the water that the local community drank and where children swam. The company knew the effects, but profit spoke louder, and Henry, ambitious and blinded by the promise of professional advancement, helped cover up the evidence. When Marigold started showing symptoms, I immediately knew what was happening. The same symptoms we documented in families near the contamination point. I started developing a treatment in secret, using my own daughter as a guinea pig, desperate to correct my mistake. I never imagined she would uncover the truth, that she would find the files I kept for so many years. Delilah listened in a state of mounting shock and horror, the pieces finally falling into place. Marigold, always more curious and impetuous, had discovered the truth in her father's files. She confronted the family in an explosion of rage and betrayal, accusing them not only of hiding her condition, but of being directly responsible for it. In the violent discussion that followed, Marigold fled to the only place where she truly felt connected to something pure, the river, ironically the source of her illness. Delilah followed her, desperate to calm her sister, to understand what was happening. But she arrived too late. Marigold had already taken a fatal dose of the same experimental medication her father had been testing on her. In her final lucid moments, holding Delilah's hand as life drained away, Marigold made her promise that she would never allow the crime to be covered up, that she would make the company pay for what it had done to the women of the family and community. "You promised, Delilah. You held my hand as I died and swore you would reveal the truth, but you never did. Instead, you ran away like we did, buried the past, and pretended it had all been just a tragic accident. Now your daughter is paying the price for our collective sins." Henry rose with difficulty, gesturing for Delilah to follow him to the basement of the house. Down there, Delilah discovered a makeshift but sophisticated complete laboratory, where her father had continued his research in secret after being forced to retire from the company. Equipment, samples, meticulous documentation, the obsessive work of a man consumed by guilt, desperately trying to find redemption through the science that had initially led him to sin. Henry explained that complete cure would require more than the experimental medication they had already started at the hospital. It would require a current sample of water from the river, which had developed a unique ecosystem in response to the contamination, combined with the genetic material of someone who survived exposure without developing the disease, someone like Delilah. You and Marigold swam in the same river, drank the same water, shared the same genetic material, but she fell ill and you didn't. You must possess a natural mutation that protected you, a rare genetic variation that could be the key to saving Ivy. We need to extract this protection from your blood and combine it with the adaptive elements that have developed in the river over the decades. It's our only hope. The revelation hit Delilah like a wave of absolute clarity. She finally understood Marigold's purpose, why her deceased sister had returned now, why she was guiding Ivy to the river, why she insisted that Delilah dive back into the waters that had taken her twin. It wasn't revenge or malice. It was the desperate attempt of a soul trapped between worlds to finally fulfill the broken promise, to expose the crime and simultaneously save the niece she never knew in life. The tension of the moment was broken by the shrill ring of Delilah's cell phone. It was Mrs. Evelyn, her voice conveying pure panic before the words even made sense. "Ivy's gone missing. No one knows how, but she's not in her room. We're reviewing the security footage now. Wait, oh my God. I'm seeing her on the cameras walking alone through the corridors. She seems to be following something, or someone we can't see. She's leaving the hospital. Through the back door towards the river." Delilah froze, the phone nearly slipping from her trembling fingers as the social worker continued, her voice now reduced to a terrified whisper. The final images from the parking lot security camera showed Ivy walking with determination toward the river, her tiny hospital gown-clad body moving with a strength it shouldn't possess. But that wasn't what had left Mrs. Evelyn in a state of shock. In the final second or two of the recording, the camera had captured clearly the figure of Marigold walking alongside the girl, firmly holding her hand. Before they disappeared from sight, Marigold had turned her face directly toward the camera, her enigmatic smile conveying as much promise as threat. Delilah. The clock in the recording marks 11:47 at night. The new moon will be at its peak at midnight, exactly as Ivy said before going into cardiac arrest. Whatever Marigold is planning, it's going to happen in 13 minutes. We're going to the river right now, but you need to get there too. If Marigold really took Ivy, I believe you're the only one who can bring her back. The new moon hung in the sky like a closed eye when Henry Whitmore's car skidded onto the muddy shoulder near the river. The rain falling in dense curtains turned the headlights into diffuse beams of yellowish light, insufficient to fully penetrate the darkness swallowing the bank. Delilah was the first to leap from the vehicle, her feet sinking into the mud as she ran toward the water. Dr. Nolan, Mrs. Evelyn and her father followed, stumbling and slipping on the treacherous ground, their flashlights cutting the darkness in frantic arcs. The electronic anklet on Delilah's ankle emitted incessant warning signals, but she had long since abandoned any concern for legal consequences. Nothing mattered beyond finding Ivy before the clock struck midnight. Ivy, daughter, where are you? Please answer, don't go near the water alone. Marigold, I know you're here, I know you can hear me. Don't do this, please, there must be another way. The answer came not in the form of sound, but of a vision that froze the four adults in their places. On the small sandy and pebbly beach, sitting calmly as if on a summer day picnic, was Ivy. Her white hospital gown was completely dry despite the torrential rain falling around her, as if an invisible bubble protected her from the elements. Even more surprising was the serene expression on her pale face, a shocking contrast to the dying child they had seen at the hospital hours before. She seemed to be animatedly conversing with the empty space beside her, gesturing and smiling, as if in the company of a dear friend. Look, Mommy, I told you you'd come. Aunt Marigold said you'd find us here. She's telling me stories about when you were little and played in this river. She says it was clean and beautiful before the bad men poisoned it. As they cautiously approached, something extraordinary happened. The emptiness beside Ivy suddenly filled with a tangible presence. Marigold materialized, not as a translucent apparition or fleeting reflection, but as an almost solid figure, as real and present as any of them. It was as if an old photograph had come to three-dimensional life, every detail perfectly visible. The simple white dress, the long dark hair identical to Delilah's, even the little scar above the eyebrow the twins had shared since a childhood fall. The reactions were instant and visceral. Henry fell to his knees in the mud, a primitive cry of anguish escaping his throat as tears mingled with the rain on his aged face. Dr. Nolan stepped back several paces, his scientific skepticism crumbling before the materialized impossibility before him. Mrs. Evelyn began whispering a prayer, her eyes fixed on the friend she had not seen in 15 years. My daughter, my Marigold, forgive me, please forgive me. I did not know you would find out. I did not imagine you would understand what it meant. I tried to protect you. I tried to find a cure before it was too late. Marigold rose with a fluid grace, as if partially freed from the constraints of gravity. Her eyes, identical to Delilah's, but containing a depth of knowledge that transcended the world of the living, fixed on her sister with an intensity that seemed to pierce the soul. When she spoke, her voice echoed strangely, as if coming simultaneously from everywhere around them, from the waters of the river, from the surrounding trees, from the very air they breathed. You promised we would always be together, remember? That you would never let them forget what they did to me, to all of us, to every woman in our family who suffered and died in silence, victims of a crime that no one had the courage to denounce. For 15 years I waited, trapped between worlds, unable to move on, prevented by the broken promise. Then Ivy was born, and in her I saw our last chance. The chance to break the cycle, to expose the truth, to finally find the cure that was within our reach all along. Delilah advanced, trembling not only from the cold rain soaking her clothes, but from the violent collision between fear and hope in her heart. Facing the sister who had returned from beyond, she let 15 years of guilt and remorse flow into her words. She understood now Marigold's pain and anger, understood what her sister had discovered on that final day, their parents' fundamental betrayal, the deliberate poisoning of the river, the non-consensual experimentation. But she would not allow Marigold to take Ivy as the price for her failure to keep the promise. Her daughter was innocent, did not deserve to pay for the mistakes of 3 generations of silence and complicity. I understand your anger, Marigold. I understand that you feel betrayed by all of us. But Ivy is just a child as we were. If you want to punish someone, punish me, not her. Take me to the river if you want, but let my daughter live. Please, there must be another way to do justice without more sacrifices. To everyone's surprise, Marigold smiled. Not a threatening or vindictive smile, but genuinely relieved, as if Delilah had finally understood something crucial. She explained that she had not come to retrieve Ivy or punish her. She had come to warn them, to guide them to the only possible solution. The disease afflicting her family was not just genetic, but environmental, intrinsically linked to the poisoned river that her ancestors had been drinking from for generations. The cure lay not only in the medication Dr. Nolan administered, but in understanding and breaking the family cycle of silence and sacrifice, and most importantly, in the public acknowledgement of the crime committed. The truth is the first part of the cure, Delilah. That's why I brought our father here tonight, so he can finally confess what he did, so he can bear the weight of his actions instead of burying them in the past. Henry Whitmore, still kneeling in the mud, did something he had never done in life. He publicly admitted, amid uncontrolled sobs, his involvement in the environmental crime and subsequent cover-up. He confessed how the company had deliberately dumped toxic waste into the river for decades, how they ignored the first signs of illness in local families, how they falsified environmental reports and bribed authorities. He described his complicity motivated by ambition, how he initially ignored the risks and then, when the consequences became undeniable, desperately tried to find a cure without exposing the truth. With every word uttered, Marigold's form seemed to become less threatening, more luminous, as if the literal confession washed something from her soul. I deserve prison. I deserve to lose everything. I don't ask for forgiveness, only the chance to help save my granddaughter before it's too late. The formula I developed after your death is almost complete, Marigold. Only one component is missing, something I could never obtain alone. Marigold approached Delilah, her eyes now gentle despite the gravity of her words. She explained that to definitively break the cycle of the disease, Delilah would need to do what no woman in the family had done before. Deliberately face the river, not to flee reality as Marigold had done, not to let herself be carried away by the current, but to voluntarily plunge into the waters and be reborn. Marigold could not complete this rite of passage because she had already given up when she reached the river on that last day, taking the fatal medications before even entering the water. But Delilah still had a chance. Her genetic material, combined with components that had evolved in the river water in response to contamination, would complete the formula for the medicine that could save not only Ivy, but all future generations of the family. You have always been the stronger of the two of us, sister. You have always been the one who had the courage that I lacked. That is why you survived when I succumbed. That is why Ivy is your daughter, not mine. You need to dive now while the new moon is directly above us. Dive not to die, but to finally live without the weight of the past. The clock on her phone read 11:58 when Delilah, after embracing Ivy and entrusting the girl to Mrs. Evelyn's care, walked determinedly to the river's edge. Dr. Nolan tried to stop her, arguing that it was madness, that the current was too strong after the rain, that they could collect water samples without risk. But Delilah knew at a level that transcended rational explanations that Marigold was right. This was a symbolic act as much as a scientific one, a ritual of purification and redemption that needed to be performed precisely as described. With her heart pounding frantically against her chest, she entered the dark waters. The current immediately proved stronger than it appeared from the bank, the icy water clinging to her clothes like eager hands. In a few seconds she was up to her waist, struggling to maintain her balance against the invisible force pulling at her legs. Is it working, Marigold? Is this what I need to do? Please tell me it's enough, that Ivy will be okay now. At the stroke of midnight, a supernatural whirlpool formed around Delilah, dragging her down. Her scream was cut off by the water invading her mouth. In her last conscious moment, Delilah saw something terrifying. Marigold had taken Ivy from Mrs. Evelyn's arms and was walking towards the river, carrying the girl. Her sister's expression alternated between loving and vengeful, as if opposing forces were battling within her. Trying to scream, only bubbles escaped Delilah's mouth as she sank, trapped in the impossible whirlpool. "Marigold, no! Let my daughter live." "Delilah!" Dr. Nolan's desperate cry pierced the night as he flung himself into the churning waters, moving with the determination of a man who had decided he would not lose another patient. The whirlpool that had swallowed Delilah spun at supernatural speed, creating a tiny maelstrom where before there had only been moderate current. On the bank, Mrs. Evelyn reacted with the swiftness of an instinctive mother, lunging at Marigold and seizing Ivy with force. To her surprise, the spectre did not resist. Marigold simply opened her arms, allowing the social worker to take the girl. Henry, seeing his chance at redemption, pulled glass vials from his pocket and began collecting samples of the mysterious spiraling water, his scientific hands working with precision despite the terror in his eyes. "This is the catalyst. The component I could never recreate in the lab. It's reacting with her genetic material. It's creating the synthesis we've always sought." After seconds that seemed like eternities, Dr. Nolan emerged from the dark waters, pulling Delilah's inert body with him. He dragged her to the bank and immediately initiated resuscitation maneuvers, his experienced hands working with calculated urgency. The water coming out of Delilah's lungs had a strange bluish luminescence, as if it had absorbed something from the depths of the river. When she finally coughed and breathed on her own, her eyes opened with a new clarity, as if she had awakened not only from near drowning, but from a much longer dream. Semi-conscious, Delilah turned her face to where Marigold was. The spectre now shone with increasing intensity, her smile genuinely peaceful for the first time since she had reappeared. As the first ray of morning sun cut the horizon, Marigold's figure began to dissolve, not into mist or shadows, but into small points of light that rose like fireflies toward the sky. "She is at peace now. The promise has been fulfilled," Delilah murmured before closing her eyes again, exhausted but finally free from the weight she had carried for 15 years. The courtroom was packed 3 months later when Judge Clarice Langdon announced her final decision. The case had attracted national attention, a story combining corporate environmental crime, family tragedy, and a mother's struggle to save her daughter. Delilah, dressed formally and with a serene expression few would have believed possible months before, listened with contained tears when Ivy's custody was officially returned to her. There were conditions, of course: ongoing psychological counseling for both of them, regular hospital visits to monitor Ivy's condition, periodic reports to social services. But these were small concessions in the face of the monumental victory of having her daughter back. The attempted murder charge has been dismissed, considering the extraordinary circumstances and the testimony of the medical professionals involved. This court recognizes that Mrs. Whitmore acted under extreme emotional distress and with the sincere belief that she was sparing her daughter from a cruel fate. More importantly, we acknowledge that her subsequent actions were instrumental in discovering the treatment that saved not only Ivy, but potentially many other children. At the hospital's now expanded laboratory, thanks to a generous research grant, Dr. Nolan proudly displayed the results of the latest tests. Ivy's illness was officially in remission, not just controlled, but effectively reversed. The samples collected from the whirlpool revealed a unique concentration of compounds that had evolved in the river's ecosystem in response to chemical contamination. These compounds, combined with Delilah's blood, which contained a rare protective genetic mutation, formed the basis for a revolutionary treatment. Delilah's father had been partially right. The river contained both the poison and the antidote, a phenomenon of environmental adaptation that science was only beginning to understand. It's as if the river itself developed an immune response to the contamination. Women in your family, without the specific protective mutation, were susceptible to the toxin, but the antidote was there too, waiting to be discovered. Marigold, in a way, instinctively knew this, even if she couldn't articulate it in scientific terms. Whitmore Pharmaceuticals, the company where Henry had worked, now faced the country's largest environmental lawsuit. After his public confession, investigations revealed decades of criminal waste disposal practices, unauthorized testing, and evidence cover-ups. As part of the court settlement, The company was forced to fully fund the cleaning of the river and establish a fund for the treatment of all victims affected by the contamination. The justice that Marigold had sought in life finally materialized, bringing closure not only to her soul, but to the entire community that had suffered silently for generations. No amount of money can erase the suffering caused, but this is a first step toward correcting the mistakes of the past. More importantly, it is an official acknowledgement of the injustices committed and a commitment that they will never be repeated, the prosecutor declared, while Henry nodded gravely by her side, finally bearing the weight of his actions in the light of day. In Delilah's new apartment, located in a quiet neighborhood near the hospital where she now worked part-time as a family support coordinator for rare diseases, life had found its rhythm again. The walls, once bare except for the solitary photo album, now displayed old and new memories. A framed photo of teenage Marigold smiled next to a recent image of healthy and happy Delilah and Ivy by the same river that was now undergoing an intense environmental recovery process. Mrs. Evelyn, who had become a constant presence in their lives, was no longer the stern social worker, but a close friend, united with Delilah by the supernatural experience they had shared and the common determination to protect vulnerable children. "I never imagined it would end up like this, Delilah. When I met you, I only saw a criminal, a mother who had tried to kill her own daughter. Now I know the truth is rarely as simple as it seems. Sometimes what appears to be the end is only the beginning of something extraordinary." In the last scene of that night, Delilah tucked Ivy into bed, carefully adjusting the blanket around her small body. The girl, now with rosy cheeks and a sparkle in her eyes, asked with the peculiar innocence of children if she would ever see her Aunt Marigold again. Delilah smiled softly, caressing her daughter's hair. She explained that Marigold now rested in peace, having completed her mission of protecting the family and exposing the truth that had remained buried for so long. She was in a better place, but would always watch over them, like a distant star guiding travelers in the darkness. "Aunt Marigold loved you very much, even without having met you in life. It was her love for you that brought her back, that gave us a chance to correct old mistakes. Now she can finally rest, knowing we are safe, and the truth has come to light." Ivy fell asleep quickly, her sleep now peaceful and free of nightmares. Watching her briefly, Delilah walked to the window. In the reflection of the glass, for an instant, she saw not her own face, but Marigold's, smiling with love as before the tragedy. It was just a trick of the light, but Delilah smiled back, feeling a peace long absent. The cycles of suffering that had defined her family for generations were finally broken. Taking one last look at her daughter, she saw Ivy sleeping soundly. Not the sleep induced by poison, but the natural rest of a healthy child. On the bedside table, a small river shell glowed with a bluish reflection, a silent witness to the journey they had taken from despair to hope, from death to true awakening. If Delilah and Ivy's story moved you, don't forget to subscribe, like, and check out the story appearing on the screen now, specially chosen for you. See you soon.